Let's talk briefly about smart objects and just how incredibly useful they are. Let's say you have a new Photoshop document that you've created and you want to bring in something that you worked on earlier, such as this snail that has a mask attached to it. If you were to just drag it onto the document that you've created directly, you'll notice something unusual happens. You get this placement object where you have this crosshair with these adjustments. If you were to press enter on it to accept it on your keyboard, you end up without the mask. And just to prove to you that it does in fact have a mask, I'll open it normally. Notice that the file itself that I just dragged and dropped didn't come over with the mask, apparently. It actually did, but it did some adjustments that you may or may not want it to do. Notice that this layer has a small icon in the bottom right corner. This tiny little icon indicates that this is a smart object. And in fact, if we were to right click on it, we have some options in here that can allow us to edit it. Edit contents, which is interesting because if you were to have a normal object in here, or a normal layer, if I were to create a layer and then just come in with a paintbrush and draw a little happy face, and I were to right click on this layer, notice that I don't have the ability to edit it as I do with this one, the smart object layer. Additionally, I have the option, the edit content here. Additionally, I have the option to rasterize the layer, and I have a whole bunch of other smart object related options available. So what if I wanted to get to that mask? What's happening? Well, a smart object is a way of bringing in and storing the entire previous file inside of your new file so that you can make multiple instances of it. In other words, if you were to duplicate it like this, you would not necessarily have two new files on here, so you can save space on it. It also allows you to do a number of other things, but I'll get to that in a moment. One thing though is, what if you want to adjust the mask? Well, double clicking the layer will bring up this dialog. After editing the contents, choose File, Save to commit the changes. Those changes will be reflected upon returning to Untitled 1. Okay, so we pop open a snail with mask.psd. Notice I also have the original snail with mask.psd. Let's see how these interact. If I were to go in with a brush, go to my mask, which if we just double click it, we can get to our mask menu. I escape and instead alt click it, I can see the mask in its entirety. If I come in with my brush and just draw in a little happy face again and pop back, you can see that I have a transparent happy face tattooed on the snail. Now, if I pop back over to this new document, nothing has changed. But if I do what was recommended and go File, Save, not Save As, when I come back, you can see that both instances have the smiley face carved in it. And in fact, if I were to create a new solid color underneath here and make that color whatever, you'd see that it is indeed transparent. It's not in white. Now, here's the real kicker. If we were to come over to the actual snail with mask, the real snail with mask, it remains unaffected. What happened when I dragged the file over was that it didn't just create a new layer, it loaded that layer with an entire copy of the original snail with mask into it. And that's what a smart object does. A smart layer, or smart object, you'll hear me slip up and use the old terminology from time to time. A smart layer will be an encapsulation of something else. Generally, it will be whatever you've loaded it into, but if you create one from scratch, which you can do, and I'll show you in just a moment, will be as a PSB file, and that stands for Photoshop Big Document, which is a document that can hold 30,000 by 30,000 pixels, which is massive. It's the sort of document you'd use if you were having like large vinyls printed to go up on a wall during an award ceremony or something like that. It would be very, very, very big and allow you to do lots and lots of details. So that would be a PSB. But let's roll back. So this isn't necessarily what you'd want, and frequently it's not what I want when I'm going on. I mean, look at this. I duplicated the snail, but the snail has changes that I didn't want going on it. This is crazy, right? So how do you normally import something so you actually have just the layer that you're after? Well, in order to do that, there are a few ways. The easiest way is to open up the document, grab the layer that you're after with whatever else. And you can shift click to grab multiples. Move over to the tab that has the document that you want it to be in, and release. And boom, voila. Behold, I've got the snail, and notice that it didn't automatically shrink it down. It's just sitting here as its own happy layer with its own layer mask associated with it. Let me turn those off so you can see it. Now this one will behave exactly as you'd expect. Dragging it to the new layer creates a second layer. These are individuals, so if I were to adjust the mask on one, it would not adjust the mask on the other one. Let's see it just kind of disappearing. All right, let me go ahead and delete that layer. So when I first used smart objects, when they were released, I think it was in Photoshop 2014, Creative Cloud 2014.1 or something like that. It's a few years back. I did not like them because I was hitting these problems immediately. I also had another problem that while by default it embeds it, it can also do what's called a linked file, where it is referencing the actual file on your desktop or whatever folder you put it in. So if you move it, it complains that it can't find it, all sorts of chaos. And at first I was very grumpy. I couldn't figure out why they do this to me, why adjust something. Well, it turns out once I knew what was happening here and I was able to use it on command, oh, they're amazing. They're just the best. They allow you to non-destructively edit things. So let me show you what I mean by that. Let's go ahead and get rid of these snails with masks. And if you look down at the bottom left corner, you can see that the document currently is going to be 95 megabytes when I save it. If I throw these away, it should shrink down when I actually save it. And sure enough, it will be 66 megabytes now. If I remove an entire layer, it will reduce it by another 10 megabytes. And so I can get it down further and further and further. So now I'm down to about 58 megabytes. So as I was saying, if you just drag it in, it will create an encapsulation of whatever it was. So for example, if we had this PNG file with this snail with no background, and just to demonstrate, it's just a snail that has nothing particularly going on. It's just got the little cutout, still has the green fringe, all that good stuff. If I were to drag that in and drop it down, it would place and automatically resize it so that it fits. If I were to enter and then I double click it so I can edit it, and I can also real quick, if you prefer, right click on it and go to edit contents, or click on it once and go to layer and go to smart object wherever it's currently hiding in this version of Photoshop. Here we are, smart objects. Oh, so it is smart objects now, not smart layer. Okay, so it's back to that. Tell it edit contents. And voila, we get in. But behold, it says that it's the snail no background PNG. In other words, it encapsulated it as whatever it was. So if I drop a JPEG in there, it will be a JPEG hidden inside of the smart object. If it's a PSD, it will be a PSD inside of the smart object. If it's a GIF, it will be a GIF inside of the smart object. Whatever you want, there it is. However, if you were to create the smart object yourself, it will become the PSB, the Photoshop Big. So how do we make a smart object? I've danced around this a few times. First, I'm going to duplicate it so I can show you some interesting things that happen. Then I'm going to pick one of these, and I will name it in advance, because once I create the smart object, it will change the title of the encapsulated file as well. So I'll call this Smart Snail. Hit enter on that. So we have the Smart Snail. Let's actually make that a smart snail. I can either create it a smart object by going to layer, smart object, convert to smart object, or I can right click on it and I can go to convert to smart object. Now I have my smart snail and my layer, which is the snail with no background. There we go, I'll spread that out a little bit. Be the snail with no background. Oh, no, that's this one. Get rid of that. Snail with no background. Snail with, how about snail with mask background? Masked background. Okay. So if I double click on this one, nothing happens except for our standard layer styles. If I double click on this one, it will pop open, behold, the smartsnail.psb file. And it will make this as small as possible. So this does do some damage because there's more to this than that. It's cropped it down. And in fact, if I were to disable this mask, shift click, you'd see that there was more going on there. So I can stretch it out though, because it was non-destructively cropped it down. The original stuff still exists. And it's possible to change the settings as well so that it won't won't crop it down. Let me save that, close that up. Voila. So we've got two seemingly identical snails. But once it's encapsulated, it does some really amazing stuff, such as protecting it from damage during adjustments. And it does that in a really cool way. I'll show you in the next video. So essentially, this is how you create an embedded smart object. Just right-click a standard layer and convert to smart object, or drag it in. Oh, there's one other way. If you go to File, and you go to Place, you can place Embedded, which is the smart objects we're working with, or place Linked. I'm going to save Linked until the end of this. It's a whole nother can of worms. Let's place Embedded. And if we were to go into Snail with Mask, we get a new Snail with Mask. If we double click, whoops, sorry. Heads up too, on a smart object, if you want to get to those layer properties and not go through the effects or the right clicks or whatever, if you double click on the text instead of the thumbnail, it will bring up your layer styles, not layer properties, layer styles. If you double click on the thumbnail, it will allow you to edit it. And notice that this is a PSD file and not the PSB file, because when you embed a smart object through File, Place, Embedded, it is the same thing as just dragging it onto the document. It loads it in, it stores an extra copy inside of your Photoshop document as whatever it was, and then it gives you a smart object to interface with. All right, all of that said, let's go ahead and take a look at why you'd actually want to have a smart object. Let me just get rid of that. See you next video.